The morning I turned 60, I woke up alone. Not the kind of alone where you feel sorry for yourself and pull the blanket tighter and stare at the ceiling waiting for someone to notice. I am talking about the deep, settled quiet of a woman who has spent decades making peace with her own company and has finally, truly done it. I lay there in the grey morning light of my bedroom in Columbus, Ohio, and I listened to the house around me. The way old houses talk to themselves in winter, the pipes, the floorboards, the particular creak of the window frame in the cold. And I felt something that I can only describe as solid, like I had become something permanent. Something that would not be moved easily. My name is Celestine Hargrave, and for 60 years I had been a woman who did not make noise. I worked my job, I raised my child, I buried my husband. I paid my bills on time, and kept my yard clean, and brought food when neighbors were sick, and showed up to things even when I didn't feel like it, and I did all of it quietly, without asking anyone to notice, without requiring applause. I had worked 31 years as a medical records administrator at St. Vincent's Hospital. I had calloused hands and a paid-off mortgage and a laugh that people said could light up a room. I was not rich, I was not poor, I was simply Celestine. And I was fine with that, or at least, I thought I was fine with that. Until that Tuesday morning in March, when the phone rang at 9 o'clock and changed the entire shape of my life. The man on the phone said his name was Gerald Whitmore, and he was an estate attorney calling from a firm I had never heard of in a city I hadn't visited in years. He asked if I was Celestine Elaine Hargrave, formerly of the Beaumont family on my mother's side, daughter of the late Loretta Beaumont Hargrave. I said yes, that was me. He said he was calling in connection with the estate of my great-uncle Reginald Theodore Beaumont, who had passed away the previous week at the age of 89. I said I was sorry to hear that, and I was, though I had met Reginald exactly twice in my life, once as a small girl at a family gathering in Cincinnati, and once briefly at a cousin's wedding when I was in my 30s. He had seemed to me then like a man made of quiet, careful, watchful, a man who listened more than he spoke and kept his own business firmly his own. Gerald Whitmore paused after I expressed my condolences. The way a person pauses, when they are about to say something that requires the other person to be sitting down. And then he said that Reginald had left his entire estate to me, that I was the sole beneficiary, that the estate had been carefully documented and verified, and was ready for transfer upon the completion of the necessary legal process. I asked him how much. He told me $38 million. I want you to understand what that number sounds like when you are standing in a kitchen with 1987 linoleum on the floor, a kitchen where you have stood for 30 years making coffee in the same pot, clipping coupons on Sunday mornings because you learned young that every dollar has to be managed or it will leave you. I want you to understand what it feels like when the number your ears are hearing does not connect to any experience Bodai has ever had, when it floats in the air in front of you like something from a language you do not speak. $38 million does not feel like a number, it feels like a mistake. I asked Gerald Whitmore to repeat it. He did. I asked him if he was certain he had the right Celestine Hargrave. He said yes, ma'am, quite certain. And he said it with the patient warmth of a man who has had this particular conversation before, and understands that it takes a moment to land. I said thank you, I would call him back. And I hung up the phone and I sat down on the kitchen floor, not on a chair, right there on that old linoleum, with my back against the cabinet and my knees up, and I held the phone against my chest and I breathed, in and out, in and out. I counted the breaths the way my mother taught me to do when I was a child, and the world felt too big. I got to 37 before the spinning stopped. Then I got back up, poured out my coffee because it had gone cold, made a fresh cup, stood at the window and watched the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel across the frost-dusted yard, and after a long while I picked up the phone again and called my son. His name is Darian Marcus Hargrave, 34 years old. Named after his father, a man I loved completely and lost too soon. Darian lived in Chicago with his wife Portia and their 2 children, my grandchildren. The best thing about every year since they were born, little Marcus, who was 7, and Naya, who had just turned 4. I had not seen Marcus and Naya in almost 8 months. I want to say that slowly so it lands the way it should. 8 months. My grandchildren, who lived a 5-hour drive away, whom I thought about every single day, who I had not held or heard laugh in 8 months. That was not for lack of trying on my part. Every time I suggested a visit, there was something in the way. A school event on their end, a work trip, a commitment with Portia's family that couldn't be moved. Always something, always reasonable sounding on its own, and always, when I stepped back and looked at the pattern, adding up to something I was not quite ready to name. I had learned, slowly and without anyone saying it directly, that Portia kept a careful hand on the shape of their family life, including who had access to it and when. She was a formidable woman, Portia, beautiful in a deliberate way, organized with the precision of someone who has decided that chaos will not be permitted in her home. The kind of woman who sends color-coded holiday cards and manages social obligations like a project with deliverables. I did not dislike her. I had tried sincerely for years to find the warmth in her, and there were moments, early on, when Darian first brought her home, when the children were babies, when I thought I had. But over time I had come to understand that what she felt toward me was something colder than dislike and more dismissive than hostility. I was inconvenient. A peripheral figure in the story she was building for her family, someone to be managed at a comfortable distance, someone whose calls could go to voicemail when life got busy, and whose feelings about that could be addressed later, or not at all. I had felt this for years and said nothing, because what do you say? You cannot accuse someone of deciding you don't matter. You just notice it, slowly, in the accumulation of small things, and you carry it and you tell yourself it's just life. Because the alternative, that your son had allowed this to happen, had participated in it, had chosen a comfortable life at the expense of his mother, was something you were not yet able to look at directly. So I called him that Tuesday morning with my heart doing something complicated in my chest, because whatever had grown between us, whatever distance and silence, surely something this large, this extraordinary, would cut through it. Surely my son would answer. He did not answer. I TY voicemail. I kept my voice steady, the way I have always kept my voice when talking to Darian, because I learned long ago that if there is any edge in my tone, any urgency that sounds like pressure, he pulls back. I said, "Sweetheart, it's your mother. I have some very important news. Please call me back as soon as you can. It is not an emergency. Everyone is fine, but please call me today." I hung up. I waited. I called again at noon and again at 3 in the afternoon, and I sent a text message that said simply, "Darian, please call me. This is important." 6 o'clock in the evening, 8 full hours after I had first tried to reach him. My phone lit up with his name. I answered before the first ring had finished. He sounded distracted. He sounded the way he had sounded for years when he called me back, like he was doing me a favor by getting around to it, like I was a task at the bottom of a list he was finally clearing. He said, "Hey Mom, what's up?" And I, despite the 8 hours, despite everything, felt that old tightening in my chest, that love and grief and something that has no clean name, all braided together, because that was my son's voice. That was the voice of the baby I had held in the hospital at 26 years old, terrified and overwhelmed and more in love than I had ever been or would ever be again. That voice did something to me that no amount of distance or disappointment had ever fully undone. I told him everything. The lawyer, the inheritance, the number. I heard the silence on the other end of the line shift in quality, the way silence does when the person holding the phone has stopped breathing for a second. Then he said, 38 million? And I said yes. He said, "Mom, for real?" And I said yes, for real. And something happened to his voice. It warmed, it quickened, and for a few minutes he sounded like the Darian I remembered from before everything got complicated, the boy who called me from college just to talk, who sat in the kitchen with me after his father's funeral and held my hand without saying anything because he knew words were not what was needed. He asked questions. Had the lawyer been verified? Was the will properly documented? What had happened to Uncle Reginald? Was there any chance of a legal challenge? And I answered everyone, and we talked for 45 minutes, longer than we had talked in probably 2 years. By the end he was saying, "Mom, I want to come see you. This weekend. Me and Portia and the kids will all come down, we'll sit together and figure out what this all means." And I said yes, of course. Come home. He did not come that weekend. He called Friday afternoon and said little Marcus had come down with a stomach bug, and they didn't want to travel with a sick child. I understood that. I said, "Give him my love. I hope he feels better soon." Darian said he'd reschedule soon. Definitely within the next couple of weeks. But the next couple of weeks passed and the reschedule never came. What came instead was something I noticed gradually, the way you notice a change in temperature, slowly, in layers, until you cannot pretend you haven't felt it. Darian started calling more, once or twice a week, which was more contact than I had gotten from him in years, but the texture of those calls was different from what I had hoped for. He did not call to ask how I was sleeping, whether my knee was still bothering me the way it had been, whether I had made it to church. He called to ask about the estate. What had Gerald Whitmore advised about the transfer timeline? Had I spoken to a financial advisor yet? What was my thinking about investments? He mentioned, almost offhandedly the first time and with increasing specificity as the weeks went on, that he and Portia had been looking seriously at a property in Lincoln Park, a Victorian in need of renovation, significant upside potential, the kind of investment that could anchor a family's financial future for generations. He said it carefully. Always careful, always framing it as information sharing rather than asking, but I heard what he was saying underneath the words. I had raised this boy. I had a mother's hearing, tuned to frequencies that no instrument can measure, I told myself. Wait and see. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe the inheritance had simply reminded him of what he'd been neglecting, shaken something loose in him, and the attention was genuine, and the love underneath it was genuine. Then I should be grateful and not suspicious. I had spent too much of my life waiting for good things to go wrong. Maybe this was just my son finding his way back. I wanted that to be true. I wanted it badly enough to let myself believe it for a few weeks longer than I should have. I should have listened to what I already knew.
3 weeks after Gerald Whitmore's phone call, on a Wednesday afternoon in April, one of those first real days of spring in Columbus, when the air smells like possibility and people drive with their windows down and the whole city seems to exhale at once. I was on my way to Gerald's office to sign the first round of transfer documents. I had my windows down. The radio was playing something I half recognized, something with a good beat. I was thinking, in the loose and pleasurable way you think when you are happy, about what kind of woman I was going to become. Not in a grand, dramatic sense. I was not thinking about yachts or travel or any of the things people on television think about when they imagine wealth. I was thinking about the community centre on Bryden Road that had been barely holding on for 3 years. One bad fundraising season away from closing. I was thinking about the scholarship fund at my old high school, where they had cut the entire arts program 2 years ago because the budget couldn't hold it. I was thinking about my best friend Dolores Prentice, who had worked double shifts at the nursing home for 15 years because she could not afford to slow down, who had not taken a vacation since 2009, who had always deserved, to rest. I was thinking about all the ways this money could move through the world and leave it better than I found it, and I was genuinely, quietly, completely happy. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like something good was only just beginning. I do not remember the exact moment of impact. I remember the light was green. I remember seeing the white pickup truck too late. The way it was moving through the intersection at a speed that meant the driver had not seen the red. I remember a sound. Not the dramatic cinematic crash that movies have conditioned us to expect, but something shockingly plain. Like a cabinet door slamming shut, just that ordinary, and then a whiteness, and then nothing at all, and then the slow, underwater return of awareness. Fluorescent lights above me, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of something plastic on my face. A voice saying my name with a professional steadiness that told me I was in a place where people said names to patients in that particular way. The ceiling of an emergency room. I had a broken collarbone, 3 fractured ribs, a gash along my left cheekbone that needed 11 stitches, a concussion significant enough that they kept me overnight for observation. The doctor who came in to go over my injuries said I was lucky, and he meant it kindly, and I nodded. And later the police officer who came to take my statement told me the passenger side of my car had been entirely crushed. The door was gone, the seat was gone. Lucky was nowhere near a strong enough word for what I was. Something had kept me. I believed that then. I believe it now. They contacted Darian. He was still listed as my emergency contact. I had never had a reason to think about changing it, had never imagined I would need to think about it, because he was my son. My only family, the person I would want to know if something happened to me. I did not find out until the next morning, from a nurse who mentioned it in passing, that he had called. He had called the hospital, asked about my condition, been told I was stable, been reassured that I was out of immediate danger, and then he had not come. I need to stay with that for a moment, because I have turned it over so many times in my mind, examined it from every angle, tried to be fair to him, tried to understand, and I want to be precise. He called. He made a phone call, he confirmed I was alive, and then he went back to his life. He did not get in his car and drive the 5 hours to Columbus. He did not book a flight. He did not get on a train. He did not send his children to see their grandmother in the hospital, did not ask a cousin or a neighbor to sit with me, did not arrange for anyone to be there. He made a phone call. And I lay in that hospital room alone. The particular aloneness of fluorescent lights at 2 a.m, and monitors beeping, and your body hurting in ways you have to negotiate with yourself to endure. And nobody from my own family was there. He called me the following afternoon. I answered from the hospital bed, my voice slower than usual from the pain medication they had given me, and he said, "Mom, thank God, I was so worried. I have been thinking about you all day." And I believed the worried part. He did sound worried, genuinely, but then he said, "Portia and I have a meeting this week that we absolutely cannot move. The Lincoln Park property, we are in final negotiations right now. It's a very sensitive point in the process, but I will come next weekend, I promise. Can you just hang on until next weekend? Can you hang on?" I lay in that bed with the broken bones and the stitches and the throbbing in my cheek, and I heard my son tell me that a real estate negotiation could not be moved, but his mother could be. I heard him ask me to wait for him. And something in me, something that had been bending for years, bending and flexing and telling itself this was what love required, this was what a good mother did, she bent, she accommodated. She did not make her pain inconvenient for others, went quiet, not angry, not even sad exactly. Just quiet, the way deep water goes quiet before it turns to ice, the way a door closes when someone has finally, completely, made up their mind. Said, "I'll be fine, Darian, don't worry about it." He said, "Are you sure?" "I genuinely feel terrible about this." I said, "I know you do. Take care of your business." He said he would call me tomorrow. He did not call the next day. He called 3 days after that, by which time I had been discharged and was home. Moving through my house in increments, holding the wall when I needed to, figuring out how to get from the bedroom to the kitchen without using my right arm. My friend Dolores came every morning and stayed through the afternoon. My neighbor Barbara, who I had known for 22 years, filled my refrigerator without being asked. The woman from church, who barely knew my name, dropped off a covered dish. The people who were not my blood showed up for me the way blood is supposed to. I took note of that. I have always taken note of the people who show up. Darian came to Columbus 4 weeks after the accident. Not that next weekend he had promised. Not the weekend after that either. 4 full weeks after I lay in that hospital room alone. He called ahead to say he was coming, and he came alone, without Portia and without the children. And I watched him pull into my driveway from the living room window, the way I used to watch for him when he was small, and I was making sure he got off the school bus safely. He was driving a car I didn't recognize. New, very expensive. The kind that announces its own features. He looked well. He looked prosperous and healthy and comfortable in the way a man looks when his life has been going in a direction he approves of. He was wearing clothes that were new and quietly costly. He looked like a man who had recently decided it was time to stop waiting and start arriving. He hugged me at the door, careful of my ribs, which I had told him about. He had brought flowers, yellow tulips, my favourite, which he still remembered after all these years. And for exactly 1 second, holding those flowers, I felt the full weight of the love I had for this person, the love that did not diminish no matter how many times it got bruised. The love that was in my body before my mind could think about it. And then he stepped inside and looked around my home, and I watched him do it. I watched his eyes move across the small living room, the old furniture. The kitchen I had kept exactly the same for 30 years. I watched him see it the way a person sees something they have been measuring in their mind for weeks. Not with contempt. Darian was not a contemptuous person. With calculation. The quiet, careful assessment of a man who has been sitting in a nice house in Chicago, thinking about a different house in Columbus, and what it might mean for a set of plans he has been building in his head. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. He talked about the drive, about the weather, about little Marcus's soccer team and Naya's current obsession with dinosaurs. She had apparently informed the entire family that a triceratops could defeat a T-Rex and was prepared to defend this position at length. I let him talk. I have always believed in letting people take the path they need to take to arrive at the thing they actually came to say. It took him about 20 minutes. But eventually the small talk thinned and his voices took on a slightly different register. More deliberate, more careful. And he said, "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking about your situation." And there it was. He had a plan. Of course he had a plan. He had been building this plan for weeks. I could tell by how fully formed it was, how carefully each piece connected to the next. A trust structure, properly established by Gerald Whitmore or a comparable attorney. He even had names to suggest, with provisions for the family's long-term financial security. Not an excessive amount, he was careful to say that, not greedy, just thoughtful. Just what any responsible person would do for their children and grandchildren. And the Lincoln Park property, if it were held within the right legal entity, if it were structured correctly, it wouldn't be a gift at all, technically speaking. It would be a family investment, something that benefited everyone. Something Celestine herself would one day leave to Marcus and Naya. He had spreadsheets on his phone, he had projections. He laid all of it out at my kitchen table with the same methodical care he had apparently been unable to extend to a 5-hour drive when his mother was in the hospital. And when he finished, he folded his hands on the table and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as magnanimous. The look of a man who believes he is doing someone a favor by wanting something from them. I did not respond to the plan immediately. I let the silence sit in the room between us, and I watched his face while the silence stretched, and then I said quietly, "Where were you, Darian?" He blinked. "What?" "When I was in the hospital." "Where were you?" The air in the room changed. I watched him shift in his chair, watched the composure reorganize itself, watched him begin to explain, the meeting, the timing, the sensitivity of the negotiations, the fact that he had called. He had checked in. He had made sure I was okay. And I said, "I know you called. I'm asking why you didn't come." And something I had never done before in 34 years of mothering this person. I held the question in the air, and I did not take it back. What followed was the conversation we had needed to have for years. Not shouted, not dramatic. I am not a dramatic woman, but real, in a way that conversations between us had stopped being. Real and direct, and without the protective softening I had always added automatically. Because I had always been so afraid of pushing him further away that I had never said clearly what the distance was costing me. I told him how it felt to reach toward him constantly. Every call, every invitation offered and deferred. Every holiday that got smaller, every visit that got shorter. I told him about 8 months without seeing my grandchildren. I told him about the hospital room and the 2 o'clock in the morning and the monitors and the particular quality of that aloneness. I told him I had been carrying something for years that I did not have a word for, the grief of a mother who becomes a stranger to her living child, who watches the distance grow and smiles and says she understands and tells herself it's fine when nothing about it is fine. He sat across from me and he was quiet in a way I had not seen from him since he was 16 years old, and we sat together at his father's graveside. When he finally spoke, he said, "I kept telling myself you were okay. Because you never asked for anything, because you always seemed fine. I used that to let myself believe that what I was doing, or not doing, was acceptable." He stopped. Then, it wasn't. Those 2 words cost him something, I could see it. They were the words of a man arriving at a truth he had been avoiding for a long time, and arriving at it was not comfortable. I said, "Needing something and not asking for it is not the same as not needing it." I stopped asking because I was tired of being disappointed. "But I need you, Darian. Not what's in my bank account. Me, your mother. I need my son." He put his face in his hands. I had not seen my son cry since Marcus's funeral 18 years ago. when he had held himself together through everything except one moment at the graveside, and then, after that, never again, not in front of me. Something broke open at my kitchen table that afternoon. I do not know exactly what it was, but I felt it break, the way you feel pressure change in a room when the window is opened. We talked for 3 hours. We ordered food, Darian's suggestion, and I noticed that he paid without ceremony, without making it a thing, and we talked about his marriage, which was more complicated than I knew, strained in ways he had not allowed himself to say out loud to anyone. We talked about the weight he carried in his professional life, the constant low-level exhaustion of feeling like he had to be exceptional every single day just to be treated as adequate. We talked about his father. We talked about the 16-year-old boy who lost his dad and tried so hard to be a man immediately, who only let himself grieve once, at the graveside, and then sealed it away somewhere and kept moving. We talked about what happens to sealed away things over 20 years. We talked about what his father actually was, not perfect, not a saint, but a man who could look at himself honestly, and that honesty was what had made him worth loving. When I was in the hospital, when Darian left that evening, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, and then he turned back and hugged me again, longer and tighter than when he had arrived, the hug of someone releasing something rather than performing something. He said, "I'll bring the kids next weekend. I'm not saying it to say it, I mean it." I told him I knew, and I did. But Portia did not know what had happened at my kitchen table, and Portia had not been sitting still. She called me 2 days after Darian's visit. Her voice on the phone had the careful, practiced warmth of a woman who has prepared the tone she intends to use the way a lawyer prepares an argument. She said she thought it was time for her and me to sit down together, just the twoest of us, and have a real conversation. She would come to Columbus that Saturday. I said, "All right, come. I want you to understand that I felt no particular dread about this. I knew what was coming, or I thought I did. I had 30 years of experience reading the shape of situations before they fully arrived. She came in that same expensive car, dressed immaculately, her face in the particular composed expression of a woman who has decided she is in control of what is about to happen. She sat on my sofa. The sofa Marcus picked out at a furniture store on Broad Street the year before he died. The sofa I have kept all this time because certain things are not about practicality, and she accepted the coffee I offered, and she sat with it balanced on her knee, and she said she wanted to be honest with me. But she appreciated that I was a direct woman, she said, and she intended to be direct in return. She said she and Darian were fully aligned on what they believed was the right approach to the estate. She had done research. She had spoken to a financial planner she trusted. She had numbers. She laid them out, calmly, the Lincoln Park property projections, the trust structure, the timeline. And then she leaned forward slightly and she said, in a voice that was gentle in the way that sometimes means the opposite, "Celestine, you have worked your whole life. You deserve to rest, but you are 60 years old and you live simply. And honestly, what are you going to do with $38 million? You don't have expensive tastes, you don't travel. Let people who understand how to build with this kind of money do what they know how to do. Let the family take care of it. Let us help you. Let the family help you." I set my coffee cup down. I looked at Portia, and I looked at her completely, perhaps for the first time in the decade I had known her, without the protective film of politeness I usually kept in place. Without the effort to find the warmth in her, I saw a very intelligent woman who had made a specific consequential mistake. She had looked at me, at 60 years of quiet, of not demanding, of accommodating, of being fine, and she had concluded that quiet was the same as empty. She had seen a woman who did not make noise and decided that woman had no weight to her, no gravity, no force that would push back if pressed. She had underestimated me so completely that it was almost not personal. It was simply a failure of imagination, and I found I could not even be angry about it. I was something much more settled than angry. I said, "Portia, I'm going to ask you to leave my home." The composure cracked, just for a moment, just enough to see the recalculation behind it. "Excuse me, I'm asking you to leave, right now. I'm asking politely, but I am asking." She stood. She gathered herself with impressive speed. At the door she turned and said, "I hope you understand what this means for things between you and Darian." I said, "So do I." She left. I stood at the window and watched that expensive car pull away from my curb, and I felt something I had not felt in years, the particular cleanness of a decision fully made. I called Gerald Whitmore the next morning and told him I was ready to move forward. Over the following weeks, I made decisions I will stand by for the rest of my life. I established the Marcus Jerome Hargrave Foundation and funded it with $21 million. Its work would be educational access, arts programs, and community health, the things I had been thinking about on that April afternoon when the light was green and the radio was playing and the whole world seemed to be opening. I endowed the scholarship program at my high school, enough that no student would have to give up the arts for a budget shortfall for the next 30 years. I called Dolores Prentice on a Tuesday evening and told her she was retired, effective immediately, and that she was to book that trip to Europe she had been talking about since 1998, and she cried so hard for so long that at one point I had to put the phone down and let her collect herself. I put a meaningful, substantial amount into a trust for Marcus and Naya, carefully structured to be available to them at age 25 for education, a home or a business of their choosing, held in their names, not their parents'. Sealed airtight by an attorney who was very good at making things airtight. I fixed the kitchen floor. I bought a new car. I breathed. I did not give Darian and Portia the Lincoln Park property.
Darian found out and he called me, and he was not angry. Or if he was, the anger was underneath something heavier, which was shame. He said, "I need to come talk to you." I said, "Come home." He came alone and he sat at my kitchen table and he said, "I handled this wrong, all of it. I've been handling you wrong for years." I said, "I know, and I let you because I kept hoping you'd find your way back without my having to say anything. That was my mistake too." He told me that things between him and Portia had become very serious, that they were in the middle of conversations that had been long overdue, that some of what was coming to light was hard. I did not ask for details, that was between them. And whatever happened there would happen, and what I needed from Darian had nothing to do with Portia's choices. He brought Marcus and Naya the following month. I heard them before I saw them, Naya's voice first. Always louder than expected from a 4-year-old, announcing something about a triceratops from the driveway, and I had the door open before they reached the porch. My granddaughter ran to me and I caught her and held her, and she was heavier than I remembered, taller, her hair done in 2 puffs with little yellow barrettes. And she smelled like strawberry shampoo and the particular sweetness of a small child who has been buckled into a car seat for 5 hours and is thrilled to be free of it. She said, "Grandma Celestine, I know what a stegosaurus eats," with the gravity of someone delivering important intelligence. Little Marcus hung back for one dignified moment. He was 7 now, old enough to feel the weight of being the older one, and then he gave up on dignity and hugged me too. And showed me the gap where his tooth had been, and explained at length that the tooth fairy had brought 3 dos, which he considered fair. I made my mother's gumbo, the recipe that starts the night before and takes the whole day. And we sat around the table, and the children talked over each other about dinosaurs and soccer and a cartoon neither Darian nor I had ever seen, and it was loud and ordinary and entirely right. It felt like what it had always been supposed to feel like. Portia was not there. I do not know what the future holds for Darian and Portia, and I know that is not mine to determine, or even to have feelings about, not directly. What I know is that my son is making his way back to himself first, and back to me as part of that same process. He calls differently now. He calls to tell me what Nia said that made him laugh so hard he had to pull over. He calls to ask what his father would have thought about something, because he has started asking that question out loud, which he never did before, as if something that was sealed has finally been unsealed. When he visits and it is time to leave, he stands in the doorway for a moment with his coat half on, and I have learned to let that moment be, to not fill it with cheerfulness or practicality, and eventually he always turns back and says something real, something that costs him a little. He is learning that things that cost you a little are usually the things most worth saying. I am watching him learn it. It is the best thing I have seen in years. My great-uncle Reginald's lawyer told me about the note. It was folded inside the will. Handwritten. 3 sentences. She's the one with her mother's eyes and her mother's good sense. She'll know what to do with it. I trust her to do right by what matters. I had not known that Reginald had known my mother well enough to say something like that. I had not known he had been watching our family from a quiet distance, taking stock of people, deciding over a long life who among them had their feet on the ground. But I believe he was right. I have my mother's eyes. I have her sense. And what I did with those $38 million, the foundation, the scholarships. Dolores finally resting in Portugal with a glass of wine and ancient tiles behind her. I believe my mother would recognize it. I believe she would nod in the way that strong women nod, slowly, with economy. The way of a person for whom approval is not given easily, and therefore means something when it comes. The Marcus Jerome Hargrave Foundation held its first public event last September. A Saturday in the park, school supplies, a health fair. A jazz quartet that played until the sun was low and orange, food from 3 different vendors, hundreds of people, children everywhere, the kind of afternoon that reminds you of what a community can do when someone decides to put resources behind it. I stood at the edge of it and watched it all happen, and I thought about Marcus, my husband, who died at 42, and never knew any of this was waiting on the other side of everything we went through. I thought about what he would have said if he could have stood beside me in that park. He was a quiet man, my Marcus, but he said the right thing at the right moment with an accuracy that still astonishes me when I think about it, years later. I think he would have put his arm around my shoulders, and he would have looked out at all of it, and in that quiet way he would have said, "There she is. There's my Celestine. I am 60 years old. I have a scar on my cheek that will be there for the rest of my life, and I have made my peace with it. It is a record of the day I was kept alive for reasons I am still discovering. I have a son who is learning, slowly and genuinely, how to be present for the people who love him. I've grandchildren who will go to college with their futures already secured, who will have choices I never had, who will make of those choices whatever they decide. I have a foundation carrying my husband's name into work that would have made him proud. I have a best friend who called me from Lisbon on a Tuesday morning just to make me listen to the sound of the fountain outside her hotel window. Because she could not believe she was actually there, and she wanted me to hear it too. I have a new kitchen floor that makes no noise when I walk on it in the morning. I have enough. I have, for the first time in my life, more than enough. And here is the thing I want to leave you with. The thing that matters, more than the number, more than the property that was not purchased, or the plan that was not followed, I learned something about myself inside all of this. I learned that I had confused quietness with goodness for so long, that I had made my silence into something that served other people's comfort more than it served my own life. I had been so committed to never being a burden, never asking, never making my needs land on someone else as an obligation, that I had slowly, without noticing, without intending to, made myself small enough to be overlooked, and the people who loved me had accepted that invitation, not out of cruelty. Out of human nature, which takes the shape of whatever container you give it. I had given them a container that asked nothing, and so they gave nothing. And we had all settled into a life that looked like family from a certain distance and felt like loneliness up close. The money did not give me my voice back. The accident did not give me my voice back. What gave me my voice back was lying in a hospital room at 2 a.m, an understanding in my bones that I had a life worth demanding to be part of, that I was not a peripheral figure in anyone's story, not my son's, not my daughter-in-law's, not the world's, that 60 years on this earth, every quiet year of it, had not been preliminary, it had been the life itself, and it deserved to be treated that way. I am not quiet anymore. I say what I need. I name what I see. I tell Darian when I miss him, directly, without apology, and I let the words land where they land. I tell my grandchildren stories about their grandfather that make them feel close to a man they never met. I answer Gerald Whitmore's calls now with the confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she wants done with what is hers. I stand in the park and I watch the foundation do its work, and I feel, underneath everything, a kind of satisfaction that has nothing to do with the number in the account, and everything to do with what I chose to do with the time I have left. I am not quiet anymore, and I will not be quiet again.